Rivian promised adventure without compromise. But when a problem that should take a single day to fix turns into a wait of 5 months, this stops being a story about a luxury EV brand having a rough patch. It becomes a story about a scaling failure hiding in plain sight. Start with one truck, a coolant fault, the kind of issue any competent shop closes out before lunch. The owner books the first available slot at the nearest service center, drops the truck off on a Tuesday, and is told to expect a call by Friday. Friday comes and goes, so does the following week. The service advisor says the part is on back order, then says it again a month later, this time for a different part. The truck sits on the lot the entire time, untouched some weeks, opened up and closed again on others, while the owner drives a rental they're paying for out of pocket because no loaner was guaranteed. Spring turns into summer. Summer turns into the kind of silence that comes when you've called so many times, the advisor stops picking up. By the time the truck comes back, it's been 5 months. Not 5 months of active repair work. 5 months of waiting in a queue that never seemed to move. This isn't a story that happened once, to one owner in one state. It's the same shape repeating across different trucks, different faults, different service centers hundreds of miles apart. A software glitch here, a drivetrain noise there, different symptoms, same ending. A vehicle parked behind a locked gate for months while its owner makes car payments on something they can't drive. The complaint isn't that Rivian trucks break. Every automaker's vehicles break. The complaint is what happens after they break. The gap between the moment something goes wrong and the moment it gets fixed. A gap that keeps stretching even as the company insists it's growing exactly the way it planned to. And that's the part worth sitting with. Rivian didn't stumble into this. The company is selling more trucks than it ever has, adding new customers by the tens of thousands, expanding into a second vehicle line built to bring in buyers who've never owned an EV before. On paper, that's the success story every automaker wants. On the ground, it's the reason a coolant fault can turn into a 5-month disappearance. The trucks kept selling, the waitlist kept growing. And that growth, the very thing Rivian points to as proof it's winning, is exactly what's about to test whether the company can still fix what it sells. By the numbers, Rivian is winning. In the second quarter of 2026 alone, the company delivered 12,194 vehicles, a 14% increase over the same quarter the year before. That's not a company treading water. That's a company accelerating, quarter after quarter, in a market where plenty of EV makers are still struggling to move inventory off the lot. Then came the R2. Rivian spent years building it, engineering a smaller, cheaper, simpler vehicle, designed to do something the R1S and R1T never could: pull in buyers who'd never considered an EV before, let alone a Rivian. External deliveries began on June 9, 2026, and the response wasn't modest. It was the kind of launch that reshapes a company's entire trajectory. Rivian didn't just meet its own expectations, it raised them, lifting full-year 2026 guidance to a range of 65,000 to 70,000 units, a number that, against the 42,247 vehicles the company delivered in 2025, represents growth of more than 50%, on the high end of that range, closer to 2/3 more, in a single year. Sit with that for a second. That kind of jump isn't gradual growth spread evenly across years. It's a compressed surge, most of it landing in a single stretch of months, as the R2 ramps from a launch number to a mainstream one. Every one of those new vehicles needs the same things the trucks already on the road need: software updates, tire work, battery service, and eventually, for some percentage of them, the kind of repair that can't be scheduled around, the kind that shows up unannounced in a parking lot or a driveway. This is the part of the story that gets told as triumph in every earnings call and every press release. More deliveries, faster growth. A brand finally proving it can scale beyond a niche audience of early adopters willing to tolerate rough edges. And all of that is true. But growth measured in vehicles delivered is only half an equation. The other half is what happens to those vehicles the first time something goes wrong, and that half doesn't show up in a delivery number. It shows up months later in a service bay when the truck that got sold in June needs a repair in October and finds itself in the same queue as every other truck sold that year. Rivian built the R2 to expand who buys a Rivian. It did exactly that, but expanding who buys the vehicle does nothing on its own to expand who can fix it. The company scaled one side of the business at a pace that looks impressive on a shareholder slide. Whether the other side scaled anywhere close to the same speed is a different question entirely, and it's one that doesn't get answered by looking at how many trucks rolled off the line. It gets answered by looking at where those trucks go when they break. Let's just look at the numbers. In early 2025, Rivian had 74 service centers across the whole country. Then it grew, 81 centers, then 95, then 97 by the end of the year, then 100 by early 2026. That's real growth, about 35% in 1 year. If you only look at that one number, it sounds like Rivian is fixing the problem fast. But growth in centers is only half the picture. The other half is where those centers actually are. Right now, there is not one single Rivian service center in North Dakota, not one in South Dakota, not one in Wyoming, not one in New Mexico, not one in Louisiana, not one in Alabama, not one in Arkansas. 7 states. And if your truck breaks down in any of them, the nearest place that can fix it might be hundreds of miles away, in a different state entirely. Somewhere in one of those 7 states right now, an owner is finding out their truck's repair means a tow truck crossing a state line before any tech even looks at it. And it's not just those states. Look north, across the border, and all of Canada has only 2 Rivian service locations. 2 for an entire country. So Rivian tries to fill the gap a different way, with vans. Around 800 mobile service vans drive out to owners instead of making owners drive in. These vans handle real work. Software updates, tire changes, small battery jobs. Together, they take care of about 60% of all service requests, and Rivian wants to push that number even higher, up to 75 or 80%. That sounds great, until you look at what a van simply cannot do. A van cannot lift a truck off the ground. A van cannot open up a high-voltage battery pack. A van cannot fix major suspension damage or put a truck back together after a real collision. Those jobs need a lift. They need a real building with real equipment. And every single one of those hard jobs, the expensive ones, the ones that take the longest, all get funneled into the same small pool of only 100 physical centers nationwide. So here's the real math. It's not service centers per truck. It's not even vans per truck. It's how many lift bays exist for every hard job that shows up. The van fleet can grow fast because vans are cheap and fast to build. But a lift bay is a building. It takes land, permits, construction, time. And while Rivian keeps selling more and more trucks, that small number of lift bays is the one number that decides how long your truck sits there waiting, no matter how many vans are out on the road. There's a name for what's actually happening behind those numbers. Call it the service center ratio. Not centers per vehicle, that number looks fine on its own. The real ratio is lift-capable bay capacity against how fast deliveries are climbing, and that number tells a very different story than the press releases do. You can see it in the accounts owners have started posting themselves. One truck sat in a Rivian service bay for more than 30 days, and it wasn't sitting there waiting for a decision. Technicians worked on it the entire time, just not on the same part twice. First, they replaced the rear motor. That didn't solve it. Then, the coolant pump. Still not it. Then, the compressor. Still not it. Finally, an AXM module went in, and only then did the truck actually get fixed. 4 different components, 4 separate guesses, each one requiring the truck to stay parked in the same bay, while a tech worked through the list by trial and error. Owners have a name for this too. They call it parts shotgunning. Replace enough components, and eventually you hit the right one. Other accounts follow the same pattern. Owners describing visible defects, panel gaps, trim that doesn't sit right, and being told by a service advisor that it's normal, nothing to worry about, even when it plainly wasn't there on delivery day. Owners living more than 90 minutes from the nearest center, with no guaranteed loaner, while their only vehicle disappears into a queue with no promised return date. None of this shows up in a delivery report. It shows up in a driveway, in a rental car bill, in a group of owners comparing notes online, and slowly realizing their experience isn't an exception. And then, there's the number that stings the most because it's so easy to compare. A 12-volt battery, a small, unglamorous part that fails on plenty of vehicles from plenty of brands, costs Rivian owners around $800 to replace at a service center. The same part, on a Tesla, gets swapped by a mobile technician for somewhere around $100. Same category of failure, same category of part, an 8 times difference in what it costs to fix it. driven entirely by whether the fix requires a scheduled trip into a scarce physical bay or a technician who can simply drive to your driveway with the part in hand. That's the service center ratio in practice. It's not a number Rivian publishes, it's the number every owner discovers the moment something breaks, the gap between how fast the company is selling trucks and how fast it can actually stand behind them once they're sold. None of this means people are walking away. If anything, the opposite is true, and it's worth asking why. Start with the truck itself. The R1S and R1T still look like nothing else on the road, and owners who cross-shop them against a Ford or a Tesla consistently come back to the same reasons. The off-road capability is real, not a marketing claim. Quad motor torque vectoring, real ground clearance, a suspension system built for terrain that would leave most luxury sport utility vehicles stranded. People buy these trucks to actually use them that way, and by most accounts, they do exactly what's promised once you get them off pavement. Then there's the buying experience itself, which owners bring up almost as often as the hardware. No dealership markup, no finance office pushing add-ons nobody asked for, no payment packing, no spread on an interest rate you never see. You configure the truck, you pay the price on the screen, and that's the transaction. For anyone who's sat through a traditional dealership floor, that alone is worth something, and it's a big part of why loyalty to this brand runs deeper than loyalty to most car companies. People aren't just buying a vehicle, they're buying out of a system they've come to resent. And Rivian, whatever its service problems, isn't that system. And Rivian isn't standing still on the problem itself. The push toward mobile service isn't just a talking point, it's a stated target, moving from roughly 60% of tickets handled by vans today toward 75 to 80%. Every ticket that shifts to a van is a ticket that never has to compete for a lift bay in the first place, which means the pressure on the physical network eases even without a single new building going up. The R2 factors in here too, and not just as the source of new demand. Rivian engineered it specifically to be simpler than the R1 platform, with fewer unique parts, and a design built from the start with manufacturing and service costs in mind. If that engineering holds up, the R2 shouldn't generate failures at the same rate the R1 has, which would mean the flood of new vehicles hitting the road doesn't translate one-to-one into a flood of new bay-dependent repairs. So the fair version of this story isn't simple villainy. It's a company that built something people genuinely love, that removed a layer of the car buying experience people have hated for decades, and that is actively trying to fix the exact problem being described here. The question was never whether Rivian sees the gap, it's whether the fixes in motion can close it before the growth in front of them makes it wider. So here's the race, laid out in its simplest form. On one side, service centers growing at roughly 35% a year, climbing from 74 to 100 in about 12 months, with a stated target of 150 by the end of 2027. On the other side, deliveries guided to reach 65,000 to 70,000 units in a single year, up more than 50% from the 42,247 delivered in 2025, with the R2 only just beginning to ramp toward its full volume. One of those numbers is growing fast. The other is growing faster, and it's not close. 150 centers by the end of 2027 sounds like a real commitment, and it is. But run the math against where the R2 is headed. If deliveries keep compounding the way guidance suggests, the fleet on the road could be meaningfully larger by the time that 150th center opens its doors than it is today. 50% more centers doesn't mean 50% more capacity where it actually matters. In the lift bays, on the hard jobs, on the repairs, a van can never touch. The gap this video started with doesn't close just because the center count goes up. It closes only if bay capacity, the real bottleneck, grows at the same pace as the trucks needing it. And right now, there's no published number proving that it does. Picture the next owner, not the one from 5 months ago, a different one, sometime in 2027, sitting in a rental car, watching a tracking app tell them their truck hasn't moved in 3 weeks. They'll have the same two choices every owner before them has had. Wait it out, trusting the brand that got them into an EV in the first place. Or post about it, compare notes with strangers online, and quietly decide their next vehicle won't wear this badge. Multiply that decision by the tens of thousands of new owners the R2 is bringing in right now. Owners with no history with this brand, no patience built up from years of loving the R1, and the stakes of that choice only get higher. Rivian promised adventure without compromise. the trucks can still deliver on that promise the moment they're working. The compromise was never in the hardware. It's in what happens the day something breaks, and whether the company fixing it can keep pace with the company selling it. Right now, one of those two numbers is winning the race, and it isn't the one that gets fixed with a wrench.